Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the N1 Fitness Podcast. I am pumped to have our guest on the show today. It's Eric Helms. Eric is a coach, athlete, author, and educator. He's published multiple peer-reviewed articles in exercise science and nutrition journals and writes for a number of commercial fitness publications. He's taught undergrad and graduate level nutrition and exercise science and speaks internationally at academic and commercial conferences for fitness, nutrition, strength, and conditioning. He has a bachelor's in fitness and wellness, a master's in exercise science, a second master's in sports nutrition, not done yet, a PhD in strength and conditioning, and is a research fellow at the Sports Performance Research Institute in New Zealand. So basically, I'm barely qualified to hold this guy's gym bag. How's it going, man?
You're more than qualified to hold my gym. And
I appreciate it.
Thank you for that introduction. Thank you for having me on. And it's a pleasure.
Yeah, well, thanks for being here. So for the listeners who aren't super familiar with you and your work, how did you initially get into all this stuff?
Good question. So I started I fell in love with lifting weights, I would say back in 2004. I think that sounds right. Yeah. In 2004. And I was going through a rough patch in life, and it became kind of this outlet that started sort of as an unhealthy, semi-masochistic kind of obsession, I would say, and then turned into something that really became a place for me to kind of just put all my passion and energy into. And I started as a competitor. I competed in my first natural bodybuilding show in 2007 and a first unsanctioned powerlifting meet in 2006. And since then, I've done 9 shows and I want to say 20 something meets since then. And really just fell in love with the heavy lifting and the hypertrophy side of it, and kind of obviously the resistance training. And as much as I fell in love with the practice, I fell in love with the science and the philosophy and kind of the culture behind it. So it became my career, it became my intellectual interest, and I kind of just poured all of my different aspects of my life into it. And I started, along with my compatriots, 3D Muscle Journey, which is a online coaching business for drug-free lifters, and also kind of just an information source for the whole community. Back in late 2009, early 2010, and I've got a whole bunch of branching side projects that have come off of me getting into the research side of it, the athlete side of it, and the coaching side of it, and kind of just doing it all the time. With all my
clearly,
energy.
Man, you're doing a ton. So before we dig into the nutritional hierarchy, what we're here to talk about today, I just want to preface the chat by saying that Eric works with primarily bodybuilders and weightlifters, right?
Yeah, exactly. So competitive strength athletes. So when a power lifter is someone who competes in the squat, the bench press, and the deadlift, an Olympic weightlifter, the snatch, and the clean and jerk. And I've done nutrition for both, and I do a lot of training for the power lifters. I have less experience doing the programming for them, and then yes, a ton of for bodybuilders. Yes.
Okay, cool. So my listeners are sort of more general pop. But I know that a lot of these fundamentals, they cross over, right? Like the staples are staples for a reason. So I just wanted to give the listeners a heads up, and that's sort of the context that we're talking in, but this is still going to be super useful for anybody because the fundamentals are the fundamentals.
Yeah, and I can play ball there a little bit. I did start it's not like you can just come out of the gates and go, I've got a personal training certification. Can I train bodybuilders? Right. most of them will want to see you get a little more experience and credibility before they let you in. So I was a personal trainer for 5 years before I actually started coaching almost exclusively. So yeah.
Awesome. So let's kind of start from the foundation and talk about energy balance. Can you tell us a little bit more about energy balance, why it's the most important factor when it comes to weight management and body comp?
Yeah, it's just such a critical thing just to understand, to have the concept and to know that the energy you take in is going to dictate the changes in your body mass to some degree, at least the changes in gross body mass. So, and this has been validated endlessly. If you look at the scientific research, every time we stick a cohort of people in a metabolic ward, which in research is just a place where we completely control their environment, where they eat only what's provided, and all of their energy expenditure is accounted for. And there's no confusion as to whether or not they didn't burn as many calories as they thought, or did they actually attend the gym, or was the heart rate monitor accurate, or did they estimate their calories at the nutrition place right, or did they not tell you about when they actually snuck in those donuts at work, or did they forget that they had donuts at work, et cetera, et cetera. Every time you put someone in an energy surplus or an energy deficit, they gain or lose mass in those conditions. Outpatient studies are obviously less consistent for all those reasons that I mentioned, but just understanding that there is a relationship where if you put yourself in a deficit, you will lose weight is critically important for anyone who wants to diet. And if you put yourself in a surplus, that's how you gain weight. That's critically important for anyone who wants to try to put on muscle mass.
Right. So the overall sort of umbrella to that, the most important factor is calories in, calories out, controlling for that. And then how do we actually sort of take it a step further and then talk about macronutrients? So protein, carbs, fat, and alcohol. Is there a most beneficial breakdown for that for adherence, or for does it really matter as long as total calories are accounted for? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's a great way you put it, is what's the best way to enhance adherence, because that is the kind of the underlying theme of everything, is that if what you do doesn't work, no matter how good it looks on paper, then it doesn't work, right? that optimal is always subservient to sustainable and effective. So the macronutrients just means they're the nutrients we need in the largest amount. So you have grams of carbohydrates, fat, protein, or alcohol if you're drinking, compared to milligrams, micrograms, or international units of your micronutrients, your vitamins and minerals. So protein, carbs, and fat are the places where we get the majority of our nutrients, or our energy, I should say. And there's 4 calories per gram of protein, 4 calories per gram of carbohydrate, and 9 calories per gram of fat. So that is essentially, if you're tracking macros, you are tracking your calories. They're one and the same. And that's a useful thing to remember. And for most people, if you are active, the protein requirements increase a little bit compared to like the minimum essential needs for someone who's sedentary. They increase a little bit more if you are weight training, and not that they increase because you must have them, but more so you'll get a better benefit out of your weight training if they're a little higher. And there is certainly some reason to probably increase your protein a little more if you are dieting, as it does enhance satiety, and it may help you maintain more muscle mass and may help you feel a little bit better on the diet. So typically the recommendation there is based on body weight, because if you think about protein, it is triggering muscle protein synthesis in each of your muscle cells, and it is providing them the building blocks to synthesize new protein. So it's going to be dependent on how big you are and how many muscle cells are in your body and how much stress you're incurring. So protein is going to be set, as a kind of a decent rule of thumb, somewhere between, say, 0.8 gram per pound of body weight up to as high as like 1.2 grams per pound of body weight. And if you are someone who actually knows your lean body mass, then you can kind of take that same figure and bump it up just slightly, say around 0.9 to 1.3 or so. And certainly you can be a little bit lower than that and do just fine, and actually probably get the similar results. You may not have as much satiety and et cetera, but that's kind of a slight increase to what we think we know, just to make sure that we're getting all the benefits, because there's really no harm to it. And then as far as carbohydrate and fat, in many ways they are largely there for energy, and you can certainly play around with their configuration a lot. When I originally put out this nutritional hierarchy, it was definitely for anaerobic athletes, strength athletes. So I emphasized carbohydrate a little more and kind of put a bit of a cap on the fat. But for the general population, I say, hey, just make sure you're getting an essential amount of both, or a minimal amount of both, I should say, and then cater it to your preferences and within your calorie allotment. So
basically, protein, it helps to set protein first, and then people can kind of fill in the amount of carbohydrates and fat based on their personal preference, and then that kind of comes back into the adherence piece, where if you prefer more carbohydrate, get that a little higher, and if you prefer more fat, more texture on your food, you can kind of lean towards that way, or just split it down the middle. Is that right? Or
I would 100% agree. Yeah, like there's huge debates, and they have raged on and on since the 80s, and with different versions of the macronutrient biases in favor of kind of pinning down one macronutrient as either the good guy, the bad guy, or one macronutrient combination as the good guy or the bad guy. And every time we try to distill the obesity epidemic or health into a single dominant macronutrient for all people, you're automatically wrong, because we've got people in the blue zones who are on 80% carbohydrate. We've got people living healthily and doing fine on very low carbohydrate diets. And there are, ethnogenetic factors, there's activity factors, there's insulin resistance, there's insulin sensitivity, and there is clinical applications for, very low carbohydrate diets. And there's times you definitely wouldn't want to do that. So there's certainly no one size fits all. And when you look at purely weight loss in healthy individuals, there's kind of a split down the middle where you've got all these different meta-analyses, which are arguably the highest form of evidence, where you are taking a study of studies and you're looking at all the weight loss studies where they control for carbohydrate or fat intake, and then looking at the major effect kind of from a bird's eye view. And we see that for the most part, there doesn't seem to be a clear winner there. So the takeaway is, so long as your protein's high enough and your calories are controlled, you're going to lose weight regardless of your breakdown of fat and carbohydrate.
Right. And then what sort of role does fiber play in there as well?
Yeah, fiber is very important, and it's a strong argument for why you probably shouldn't go completely absent of carbohydrate, as fiber is a carbohydrate. A lot of the foods that we see as healthy are carbohydrates, fruits, vegetables. Fiber is classified under carbohydrate. So a good rule of thumb is about 10 grams for every 1,000 calories in your diet of fiber. That's kind of just a bare minimum. And if you are able to eat a healthy, mostly unprocessed, kind of like 80-20 breakdown of foods, that 80% being like mostly single item of food ingredients, and that 20% being whatever the heck you want because you're an adult within reason, and not being afraid of any foods. If you do that and you're getting in, copious amounts of fruit and vegetables, you're going to cover that allotment quite easily. Although it is important while you're dieting, and it's just important for health in general, as fiber does add to satiety and also modifies your energy expenditure a bit.
Amazing. So next up is kind of micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, all that good stuff. So what part does, I guess, food quality, you just kind of touch on it, 80-20, but what part does that play in the pyramid?
I touch on food quality a lot in the micronutrients kind of level of the pyramid. And, when we look at the nutritional hierarchy, it is set up as a dominant starting at the bottom, kind of an architectural view of a pyramid. So, the stuff at the bottom is what should make up the largest proportion of your thought energy and the direction of how you set up your diet, and kind of getting more and more small at the top, eventually ending in supplements, which are basically not even needed in most cases. And so micronutrients are higher up the pyramid, but I would say that paying attention to food quality and thinking about the actual foods you eat is also a huge part of behavior and lifestyle.
Right.
And I don't want to, jump the gun too early, because I'm sure you want to get into this as well. But I think the easiest way to position it is that there's been this movement called If It Fits Your Macros, which most people are probably aware of today. It was kind of almost exclusively something that started on the bodybuilding.com forums back around when I was coming up, like in 2007 or so. It was our answer to a lot of the early guys getting into it who weren't sure if they were allowed to eat certain foods, and they're dieting for their show or they're just doing a cut, and they ask the more experienced people on the forums, hey, can I have white rice? And we would say, well, if it fits your macros. And that I was there and on those boards when that actually became a thing we said and got turned into an acronym and then became a movement. So that's a good thing to know, and it's very useful that, hey, in the end, if you can fit foods to your quantitative numbers that are appropriate for you, that you've deemed are effective, that, yeah, you can pretty much have what you want within reason, and you'll have pretty good results. But at the same time, that started with that kind of in the background of knowing that for the most part we're eating healthy, unprocessed foods and high protein diets, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and plenty of fruits and vegetables. And I would say some people or representatives or people who utilize this diet try to do it and see what they can get away with. We used to make the joke, like, well, no one is going to go out there and just eat ice cream and protein powder. And then, then you go on some Instagram profiles and you go, God damn it seems like they're only eating ice cream and protein powder,
Right.
So it's kind of just a lesson for all of us professionals that if someone can do it, in this crazy world we live in, someone will. So I think it's important to position that, yes, micronutrients are probably going to get taken care of in many cases if you just focus on calories, macros, and a largely healthy diet. But you do need to ensure a certain minimum intake of fruit and vegetables. Decent recommendation I give to covering your macros is to have overall a position of having variety, what I call having an inclusive versus exclusive diet. So rather than seeing foods as unhealthy, because largely there are very few foods that are truly just unhealthy, regardless of the dosage or frequency. And it's, just any time you eat it, not whether you had it once a year. So largely, don't be afraid of foods. Don't avoid foods, and think of including a variety of foods that are micronutrient dense in your diet versus trying to exclude foods that you see as devoid of micronutrients. So like instead of trying to cut out every single sweet or processed food, try to have a lot of different variety in your fruit and vegetable intake. I think that's a good way to ensure it. And then from a quantitative perspective, minimum intake of like 1 serving for every 1,000 calories rounded up. And I do mean that as a minimum intake, as there's a meta-analysis out there showing that, like the health benefits seem to be associated with, like 5 to 9 servings of fruit and vegetables per day. So, if you were to look at your average diet of 2,500 calories, let's just say, that's 3 servings of each, and you're scraping the bottom of that range. So you probably want to, definitely see that as a minimum intake. And in my experience, most people when they're dieting, they meet that despite the fact they have lower calories, because those are more filling foods. And then when they're trying to actually gain weight, which is very common in the bodybuilding community, those intakes go down because they don't want to be satiated. They want to have an easier time getting their food in. So that's probably okay. But
right. That's really cool. So what I love that you mentioned if it's your macros, because I heard Alan Aragon on a few podcasts talking about sort of the origins of it too, and clearly you were there as well. But who is there sort of a classic client that you find that IIFYM approach works really well for? I mean, for example, a 180-pound lean male has a lot more caloric load to work with than, for example, a 120-pound female or something like that. So is there sort of a maybe, I don't want to set boundaries on it, but a generic sort of range, or someone who that actually tends to work quite well for, and then someone who maybe it doesn't? Or
it really comes down to kind of the diet culture you were raised in. Like if you're someone who's active online, and before you actually come to a trainer, you are researching nutrition and all this stuff, and doing so in reasonable circles. Like you're not just like on Gwyneth Paltrow's like Facebook page or something like that, then that you'll probably do all right with it, because you'll get exposed to calculators, you'll get exposed to, you'll be playing around with, BMR calculations and activity multipliers and thinking about it, and then looking at your diet and going, oh, how should I set up my food? And if that's you, and you have an understanding of that, and you've kind of thought about how it plays into your current food intake, and then you're in the kind of that information seeking and planning stage, which hopefully you've gone through before you come to a trainer, or that trainer's going to have a tough time. Just that motivational stage, not necessarily looking online, then you're probably going to be a good candidate for it. I do think everyone would benefit, anyone who wants to improve their nutrition, from at some point going through the process of weighing, tracking, looking at foods, and trying to fit foods to numbers, although it doesn't necessarily need to be a permanent condition, and probably shouldn't be. In fact, there are very few cases, and some of them involve clinical interventions for people with an eating disorder, to where there always needs to be some level of quantification. So even with bodybuilders who have to work very hard to get into extremely lean condition and have to kind of count everything, at least at some point, or have some system that approximates that, they, in my opinion, shouldn't be doing that at a certain stage in the off season, when kind of they taper out of that contest prep phase, and they go to more of kind of a habit-based diet, maybe just tracking body weight changes and looking in the mirror. So I would say, regardless of whether you're a 180-pound male or you have a large calorie allotment to play with, or you're a 120-pound female and you're, let's say, you have a desk job and you have a very small amount, it's useful to track. I think you'll get into trouble if you take a IIFYM mentality of let's see what I can get away with while tracking if you have a low calorie allotment, because then that bowl of light ice cream will eat up a ton of your calories instead of a reasonable portion as if you had a larger amount. So I think it's more of how do you do it and what culture were you raised in. If you're coming with the mindset of, the vast majority of food I would be eating is going to be, unprocessed single item food ingredient, kind of healthy foods that are, fruits, vegetables, lean meats, lean dairies, or et cetera. And then, you can have a lot of food that is not taking up a ton of caloric space. And then you can have a treat here and there. You'll do a lot better than if you're the person who's like, right, let me cover my protein requirements and then just eat whatever the hell I want. So I think there is a time and a place to take that latter approach. If you are feeling restricted by the diet, if you think it'll improve your adherence. But I think a lot of people don't really know what will improve their adherence. Like actually catering to your cravings makes diets harder while ensuring that you get a little bit of the good stuff, but you're largely, keeping a nice, balanced, healthy diet in place so that hunger is not constantly gnawing at your brain is probably a better approach. So that's why I think discretionary calories should be seen in the kind of that 10 to 20% of your calorie range versus what's the most I can fit in, because that'll improve adherence. Well, I haven't seen that in my experience.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's an amazing explanation. I love that you mentioned, everybody taking a period of time, whether it's, 2 to 4 weeks, whatever, and portioning, weighing, measuring, all that sort of stuff, just to get a way better idea of what they're actually taking in. Because, man, we just don't know. We just have no idea. So
yeah, there's just to dovetail off that before I go tangent too far on this. I preach that if you can teach someone just self-awareness, mindful eating, and use habit-based and behavior-based interventions, and let's say they're overweight and they can lose weight and get healthy, great, stop there. And only pull out the food scale and go with the quantitative route, if necessary. But there should still be like kind of that baseline phase of just education, like here's what calories are, here's what macronutrients are, and let's take a look at your current diet. Why don't you just track, and I won't even change anything. Just track your food for 2 weeks, or we'll get you to weigh in a few times, teach you how to weigh in consistent conditions, and we'll just look at some things. And, that period can be really useful for both the client and the trainer. The client is going to learn all that stuff you just talked about, which really helps them become more aware and more accurate in guessing. But also the trainer can learn something too. So if someone who is, steadily and slowly gaining weight, which is a large portion of our society and kind of what leads to the obesity statistics we have now, and they start just tracking without any intervention, but just writing down what they're eating, maybe writing down their subjective feelings and thoughts around those times as well. One of three things will happen. They'll maintain their weight, they'll lose weight, or they'll gain weight. And many times they're going to lose weight. And that tells you, the issue here is mindless eating and not having an awareness. And it's actually, maybe we need to do things like we're not eating in front of the television. You're going to, do all these habit-based changes to help them eat less and just become more mindful. But if they don't lose weight or gain weight still, then the issue is really the foods they're selecting and the way they're eating, and the portion sizes are the issue. And they don't really see that as a problem. It's not just a lack of awareness or time. That's when you need to get in there and actually teach them that portion control side of it. So I think that's an invaluable practice, like you said, and it gives you different tools and different clues based on what happens during that period. Amazing.
Yeah, and I think a really, really useful tool for people would be something you alluded to, was just the book Mindless Eating. It's pretty incredible. I don't know if you've read it, but it's pretty incredible to just kind of almost just make it easier for yourself, trick your brain by using smaller plates, not having food out and visible all the time, things like that, to just make it as easy as possible for folks to basically put in the least amount of effort they can and still reach their goals.
Exactly, and I totally agree.
So next up is nutrient timing, and as we kind of climb this pyramid, obviously we're getting to the less and less important things. But nutrient timing, does it make much of a difference with folks stressing about when their meals are, say around workouts? If they skip breakfast, is their muscle going to fall off? All that sort of stuff. So does nutrient timing, or what part does nutrient timing play?
Great question. Yeah. So for for athletes, nutrient timing is conditionally important, and it is more important for athletes who expend more fuel in training. And that kind of makes sense when you really think about it. Like if you're a multi-stage endurance athlete, nutrient timing going to move down this pyramid quite a great degree. But this is a pyramid that I created for bodybuilders and powerlifters who have a relatively low volume of training compared to that and a much lower energy expenditure per session. So for bodybuilders and powerlifters, the aspects of nutrient timing still carry some level of relevance, but not nearly to the same stage as someone like that. So there's a few different ways that I like to look at nutrient timing, and one's on the very short-term scale, and one's kind of the long-term scale. So starting at the largest period of time possible, we're looking at perhaps like a diet break. So this is like kind of like diet periodization. When are you going to have a deficit and when are you not? And this can make a significant difference. There was actually a recent paper that came out called the Matador study, and Matador is some ridiculous acronym talking about like time-restricted feeding, where they had
acronym ever.
Yeah, it's super long. Yeah, and basically they had a group that would diet for 2 weeks and then take 2 weeks off and eat maintenance in a highly controlled manner. So it was actually eating at maintenance, not ad libitum, and then rinse and repeat. And they got 16 total weeks of dieting in, and they had another group that just had 16 weeks straight. So, the cons of this 2-on, 2-off was that it took twice as long. But the pros were that they kept about, the biggest findings, they lost about 50% more body weight and fat, which is huge for the same total time in a deficit. Now, not everyone's going to be willing to, take twice as long to lose half as much or half again more. But for someone who's looking for a long-term lifestyle change, that's huge. Also, you don't necessarily need to set it up so that it's 2-on, 2-off. Maybe once every 4 to 8 weeks would be, useful. And that's kind of what I do in my practice. They also found that when adjusted for fat-free mass and fat mass changes, that there was less reduction in resting metabolic rate, or I should say resting energy expenditure. So the folks who were doing diet breaks seemed to reverse some of the adaptive thermogenesis of dieting and maintain a higher energy expenditure throughout, which probably explains why there was perhaps more weight loss and more diet efficiency, you could say. And then probably even more importantly for the general population, for people who are looking to lose a fair amount of weight, was that the 6-month follow-up, this gap had widened even further between the groups, and the advantage of the diet break scenario was even more apparent. And these numbers were, 2/3 versus half, again, as much. So people had maintained a lot more weight loss afterwards, and that makes sense. You're learning to deal with coming in and out of a deficit. You're learning what maintenance feels like. You're not only psychologically getting to practice maintenance, you're also practicing the diet. And the diet phases are more effective because of those maintenance phases. And it just is more total time spent practicing. You've got, 32 weeks versus 16 and a higher energy expenditure. It makes sense. So they're going to be much more prepared for that diet to finish and maintain the weight loss that they achieved. So that's kind of the biggest time frame where we're potentially manipulating things from a nutrient timing standpoint. Less than that is kind of like within your quote unquote microcycle within the week. Are you going to have days where you do and don't diet? And there's some interesting work on alternate day fasting that shows that can be pretty effective, at least as effective as dieting with a straight calorie deficit. And there's some interesting work on what's called the 5 and 2 diet, which means that 5 days per week you're eating a normal diet, and then 2 days per week you're on either complete fasting or like a protein modified fast. That seems to be at least as effective and sometimes more effective depending on which study compared to just a straight linear calorie deficit. Then much less researched, but still an interesting concept, is that of the refeed, where you're taking either a 24 or maybe a 48-hour period, and you're bringing carbohydrates up to replenish glycogen, and you're eating at maintenance or slightly higher to try to get the same effects that we're seeing in that diet break study. But obviously the time scale is going to amplify the magnitude of effect. So if you were to take 1 day off your diet, it's going to have a very minimal effect on resting energy expenditure and enhancing your diet afterwards. If you take a full week or 2 weeks, in the case of that Matador study, you're probably going to get a much higher effect. And manipulating a lot of these variables is a little more playing around the edges of the scientific data we have. We know that basically the total amount of food you eat and the time course is going to impact how effective a refeed is. And right now, I can make I would make the argument that if you're just doing a single day into a calorie surplus, it's not going to have a huge effect on a lot of the things we're trying to target. It will definitely replenish glycogen. You'll feel better. You'll probably have a good training session, but it will have less of an effect on subsequent fat loss phases, I would say. So typically with my clients, I'm working with 48-hour refeeds as kind of the minimum, and then eventually maybe giving them another day off. So they're dieting 4 to 6 days per week and having 1 to 3 days off from dieting as basically kind of where I start. And most of the time, it's just a 48-hour refeed every week, and that's for competitors. You don't need to do that if you're high in body fat and dieting over a long period. You could just use diet breaks as a strategy, but I find it can help adherence. Most people struggle on the weekend anyway, so instead of just giving yourself a goal you can't meet and then feeling bad when you don't meet it and then completely blowing it out of the water because screw it, I already blew it, right? It's instead going, right, I can make this work. I have 3,000 calories to play with on Saturday and Sunday, not my regular 2,000. I'm going to do fine, And I find people are much more likely to get closer to what the target is when they have a realistic target than when they set themselves up for failure. So I think that's a good way to look at that. And then finally below that, we're looking at meal frequency and peri-workout nutrition. So that's within the day. How many meals am I going to eat per day? And then am I going to be trying to fuel or put nutrients around my workout to recover from it? And that one's a little more straightforward. Essentially, if you're eating anywhere between 3 to 6 meals per day, there doesn't seem to be much of a difference in terms of fat loss, muscle retention, hunger signals, or performance in any kind of study we've seen. Not a ton of research in this area, but enough that I'm pretty confident saying that. If you're roughly spreading your protein between meals and you don't have any kind of crazy distribution over those days, you're probably fine. Eating too few meals and you go very long periods without getting calories, and you think about food, you get hungry. Eating too many meals and you're eating very small meals very frequently, and you're constantly thinking about food and you're never quite satisfied. So it's kind of a little bit of a bell curve there. Now that said, on an individual basis, there are some people who do well with fasting, and they find they're actually less hungry in a fasted state than if they'd eaten a small meal. And that's why you see kind of the rise of the intermittent fasting crowd that's been around for long enough. I can say it's probably not a fad. And it's even got one study behind it suggesting it's a workable system. So that would be like, eating all your food in something like a 4 to 8 hour window, 4 to 10 hour window, anywhere in that range. Sometimes it just looks like skipping breakfast and eating a late lunch and then eating the rest of the day. It could be that simple. And for some people, this really helps adherence. It allows them to be productive, focus on other things in the morning, have a lunch break, and then get back to it, train, come home and eat dinner, and they're fine. And I kind of do a modified version of that. I just have like a protein bar in the morning, and I just find it fits with my life schedule. For some people, though, they always wake up hungry. And it probably has something to do with, glucose kinetics and resting blood sugar levels. And it's just a really tough thing. They wake up hungry, they're distracted, they have low energy levels, they're cranky, and it's an impediment to their success versus something that assists it. And I find this is very individually dependent. So in these cases, meal frequency can become very important because it's actually affecting adherence and it's affecting energy balance. So it kind of is a way to affect another level of the pyramid. So anytime you're doing something at the higher levels of the pyramid that might mess up the bottom, you want to change that because you're you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? If you're trying to follow a meal frequency schedule that for some reason you've been told you have to follow, but it's messing up your adherence, and therefore your energy balance or your macronutrient intake, that should be modified. So yeah, as far as strength athletes and general population folks who are doing a couple cardio sessions a week and a couple lifting sessions, the only kind of workout nutrition you really need to think about is just making sure there's available amino acids to start repairing the work you did, so you have less soreness and more likely to progress, maintain more muscle mass, make all of the kind of things we want to see happen in the weight room work. And so long as you're getting one of your protein servings, if you were to take that gram per pound guideline I gave you and divide it between 3 to 6, however many meals you want, and then one of those occurs within 1 to 2 hours on either side of your weight training, you're probably good to go.
Incredible explanation. That's awesome. So lastly, we're at the top of the pyramid, or the smallest part, with supplements. So what sort of role do supplements play? You already touched on this, that they're the smallest portion of the pyramid, but are there some supplements that have more efficacy than others, or some more just kind of a waste of resources and marketing hype, or where should people kind of, how should they wrap their brains around subs?
Yeah, I think, when I first got into bodybuilding, the pyramid in my brain, say 2005, maybe 2004, to give myself a little more credit, would have been basically a 3-pointed pyramid with equal importance at each end of training, nutrition, and supplements.
Me too.
You get
your
training right?
Yeah.
You get your training right, you get your nutrition right, you get your supplements right, and you make gains. And supplements are a solid third. But I think the reality is that even the most evidence-based supplements that do something, like your creatine or caffeine. Well, I'll use creatine as a good example because it's not a stimulant, so you don't actually feel any effect when you use it. It's possible that you may not even ever notice the effects of creatine, even though it's been studied for 2 decades and is probably the most effective supplement that we have on the market. That's how little of a difference it makes. You take the best one we've got that's not an anabolic steroid and use it consistently, use it correctly with your training, and you may not be like, oh, actually, I've been performing a lot better after these 1 week of loading. Some people may have noticed a few more reps or hit a PR or something, but it's certainly plausible that it could be helping you, but not to even a level of magnitude that you'd notice it. So that's kind of puts it in perspective. Supplements are exactly what that word means. Supplementary. They're not necessary. Like if you had to fill out your tax forms and you were like, you know what, screw the 1040 EZ, I'm just going to send in my little supplementary one about my, the inheritance I got from my grandfather's farm, and just sent that in. The tax man would be like, where's your 1040?
Yeah.
So, yeah, exactly. So supplements are not a standalone, and they're completely unnecessary. They can be beneficial in some cases. Unfortunately, the supplement industry, I would say about a solid 95% of it is based on marketing hype, endorsement from athletes or fitness competitors or bodybuilders or fitness models who have a conflict of interest because they're getting paid or getting free supplements, and that can sometimes be fine. You just don't know the ethics involved. You don't know if that individual is actually using it and actually likes it.
Oh, hello.
Yes. Buddy, my cat always wants to join us. He's a big fan of the supplement industry, so he wanted to correct me on that.
Right.
Yeah. So most supplements are at best just a waste of money, and at worst could be potentially harmful. There is unfortunately there's been a rise of contaminated supplements, either with just poor manufacturing practices, like fish oil with more mercury in it, which is harmful if taken in too frequent or high a dosage, to more commonly just actually tainted supplements, where either inadvertently or most likely purposefully performance-enhancing drugs are put in supplements so that you get a better effect. Right?
It's wild.
Yeah, it is wild, and it's a huge problem if you're a drug-tested athlete.
Right.
So it's something that I'm very cautious with because I compete and have my athletes compete in natural bodybuilding and powerlifting. And that can completely ruin your career and your reputation. If you've been a drug-free athlete and because you were just careless with what supplements you took and didn't see if they're batch tested or they weren't from an approved source or et cetera, you failed a drug test, no one's going to believe you. It's like, yeah, sure, it was the pre-workout, bro, kind of thing.
Exactly.
So, yeah, it's something you want to be careful with. So some really useful resources out there. I think kind of the most actionable information I can give someone is go to examine.com. This is a really great website run by some good folks, and they basically have created like the Wikipedia of supplements. So each supplement has like a Wikipedia page where it talks about what it is, how it works, why it works, etc., what it shouldn't be interacted with, and what the dosage should be. And then it has what's called the human effect matrix, which is awesome. It basically gives the quality of the evidence, and it's all based on human research, and it's A, B, C, or D kind of thing, and then the magnitude of the effect size, either small, moderate, or large, and then the amount of agreement in the scientific literature. So if there's 6 studies and 5 of them show an effect and 1 doesn't, that's pretty good. But if it's 3 and 3, then you can expect that maybe the effect is not that consistently found. It may or may not work for you. Links to the actual abstracts on PubMed, and the conditions and that would be appropriate to use. So I think being picky and choosy and being a late adopter is actually a good thing with supplements. So what I mean by that is that you want to wait until there's a solid amount of evidence before you pull the trigger on something. And the reason being is that, one, you really got to get outside of that kind of silver bullet mindset that I'm still looking for that magic thing that's going to get me great gains. And I think that's really part of our culture in fitness, that we don't even realize it. Even when you start to become a little more evidence-based and rational and you've been in the gym for a while, you kind of always think there's a magic bullet that's going to enhance your gains, or you want to believe it. And it's kind of fun. It's the culture of the articles we read. It's the language that we speak in. But it truly doesn't exist. And to kind of take that message home and to heart means that you don't feel like you're at risk of missing something by not taking a supplement even for a few months to wait for more research to come out, or for a few years. You know that at best it'll make a negligible difference. And the cons are actually worse than the pros if there's a risk of taking it. And I'll give an example. So D-aspartic acid popped up on the scene in 2009. It had one single study on humans that was the only study on humans that wasn't in vitro or in rats, finding that it increased testosterone production in men by about 30%. And within weeks of that getting published, every supplement company was creating a testosterone booster that included it. And it took about a couple years before a study came out where they tried to use it in actual intervention with weight training, and they found out it didn't seem to enhance fat loss, muscle gain, or performance. And everyone thought, oh, no harm, no foul, whatever. Like every other time, I just waste my money and it didn't actually help me. No big deal. Then another few years go by and a study comes out actually showing that it decreased testosterone production. So now we're wondering, well, hold on, does it increase, decrease, or does it maybe do one or the other but have no impact on my performance? I have no idea. And you don't have any idea either unless you actually got blood work done. But the point is that it's possible that you were actually taking something harmful. So there's no reason to jump the gun because it could be just as likely to be beneficial as harmful. So wait until something has a preponderance of evidence behind it. You can check that on examine.com. And then if you do decide to pull the trigger, you want to buy from a reputable supplement company that has some good manufacturing standards. Some good things you can check behind that are GMP certified or NS certified. There's a number of different independent third parties that will certify supplements manufacturing processes and characteristics, the way they do things. Not always financially feasible for kind of startup supplement companies. So another thing that supplement companies will do is send you lab reports, batch tests to show you that indeed what you're buying, what's in there is in there. Those aren't foolproof. Obviously, it's still in the company's hands to send you that, but certainly it's a good sign. If you can contact there's sometimes some countries, not all of them do this, will have that their drug testing organization will have a list of certified supplements. Again, this costs money, but that's a very safe bet. So yeah, if you can verify the scientific veracity of it with examine.com and then attach yourself to good supplement companies that are doing good work and are run by good people and have good processes, then you're kind of safe. Some ones that I kind of give a shout out to that I think have great evidence-based supplements and then do a good job of quality control would be Citadel Nutrition, Legion Athletics, De Novo Nutrition, also Omar Isuf. He produces some stuff I think through Gnosis Singularity. It's a pre-workout supplement. Those are all some kind of startup, smaller, evidence-based companies that do a good job of quality control and only produce supplements that actually will do something, which is a small line because that's just the nature of how many supplements actually do anything. And then the last thing I want to say about supplements is make sure that the effect that it has is actually going to help you with your goals. So, for example, it wouldn't make sense for a powerlifter to take beta-alanine, even though it does work, because it's pretty much only going to benefit, 30 to 60 second plus kind of efforts. And even if you're taking 2-second concentric eccentric, which people don't actually do in training, you're going to have to do a lot of reps before you're doing it consistently for 30 seconds.
Awesome. Yeah. So I think I'll link to Examine in the show notes. That's an incredible resource. And then some of those supplement companies as well. And I think a really useful way for folks to think about this is what you said about creatine. It is the most studied supplement out there, and you still might not even notice the effects of it. I think that sort of sums up where supplements are at right now, and to focus on the more foundational parts of your pyramid, and that's why they're right up at the top in that smallest spot.
Definitely.
So now that we've got the whole pyramid kind of put together, now we have that umbrella portion around behavior and lifestyle. So this one's clearly going to have the most variance from person to person, where they are currently, where they want to go, what sort of time frame. But what are the key elements that you kind of see for implementing nutritional habits, and most of all sustaining nutritional habits, because that's the most important thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the reason why I didn't even put behavior and lifestyle in the pyramid is because it encompasses everything. And if you think about it, there's not a single culture on this planet, and there never has been throughout time, where food is not a central component to family, community, making peace, making friends. There's rules around it, and it's because it is how our society functions and how we as individuals interact. I don't care if you are Irish, Italian, or Mexican, you're going to have a grandmother who's going to try to feed you more than you want to eat. That's just kind of like a universal grandmother rule,
Totally. Or Indian. My grandmother.
There you go. See? I could probably just say every ethnicity, and totally. I would eventually, I don't think I'd be wrong. So you can't look at food and be like, right, I'm an athlete, I only eat for fuel, man. No, you have to realize that in the end, if you modify your nutrition, you're modifying your lifestyle. So if any trainer is going to think about getting under the hood and messing with this stuff, they've really got to realize that they have to heavily consider behavior and lifestyle. So as I kind of tangented on earlier, if you can get away with just behavior modification and doing some of that mindless eating stuff, like, reducing the size of plates, keeping food hidden, just making sure that you only are eating when you're actually focused on eating, not in front of the TV, that you're having a glass of water and a side salad and like dipping your fork in the dressing instead of putting it on top before you get to your main, asking for butter on the side, all these little things where you're essentially still doing the same behaviors, but just modifying them so that you can control for calories, are ways where you don't mess with that culture side of it. And you don't mess with that lifestyle side of it, but you're able to reduce calories. And those are extremely effective techniques. And another reason why I think the intermittent fasting thing works is rarely do people regularly eat breakfast as a communal thing. Like most of the time, people who work, like they're grabbing a Pop-Tart, they're having a quick, cereal, and it's only on the weekends where the family sits down and has breakfast. So, going like an IF approach Monday through Friday, it's not anything magic. It's just, when there's not a strong social component to eating, you don't eat it, and it reduces calories because you're still going to be the same way for the rest of the day. So behavior and lifestyle is critically important. And I think the behavior side of it, it's really important to know about rigid and flexible dieting. So flexible dieting is a term that gets thrown around a lot on the internet, but most people don't really know what it means, and they kind of see it as equivalent to if it fits your macros. But the roots of flexible dieting come from research on people who have a flexible model of restraint. So when they're actually asked questions about their food with validated questionnaires, they score high on flexible restraint versus rigid restraint. And what that means is they don't have a black and white mindset with food. They understand that if they had a day where they overate heavily, that the next day they can moderate their food and it would be roughly a wash. Versus someone with a more rigid mindset would see themselves either being on or off the diet, or there are good and bad foods. And once they've blown it, you might as well write off the whole day. So fuck it, let's go get some pizza. And pardon my French.
Right.
So if anyone's listening is offended by that, my bad.
Oh no, so, this is explicit podcast here, dude. Like, do whatever you want to do.
Beautiful. I will start cussing up a storm now.
Perfect. More the better.
Yeah. So yeah, and repeatedly they found that those with a flexible mindset typically weigh less, are more effective when they lose weight, sustain that weight loss more, don't have as many issues with their body and with food when they diet, and tend to actually. Sorry, this is a separate finding. In another study, they found that over a 3-year period, when rigid behaviors shifted more towards flexible, that correlated with more weight loss. So if you've got let's say a nutritionist and or a behavior person, whoever's working with you, and they're helping you adopt these different perspectives on food, as your score shifts from a rigid restrainer to a flexible restrainer, that predicts how effective you're going to lose and then maintain weight loss over a 3-year period. So it certainly seems like this is a very important aspect. So this is where it comes back to having that inclusive versus exclusive mindset and thinking of things in just this hierarchical format. The whole reason I set up the pyramid like this instead of just having like the 10 Commandments is that our normal exposure to nutrition are these isolated articles that oversell themselves and have a clickbaity title, and they make it seem like every article is of the utmost importance, whether it's an article on nutrient timing, whether it's an article on iron supplementation, or whether it's an article on calories in, calories out. They are all a biohack. They're the most important thing. They're going to help you get your goals yesterday, and if you screw it up, then you've missed the boat. And that's just not the case. So the reason I presented it in that pyramid is to kind of support that flexible mindset. And the reason why I provide ranges and continuums versus absolute numbers is it shows you that there's no such thing as optimal. There's a range of what makes sense, and then there's degrees of being outside of that. So one system I use is what's called better, best, good. Best, better, good. So for example, with some of my athletes, I'll go, hey, best case scenario, we're able to hit all our macros within the target ranges. If you can't, better than the baseline level of good would be you got protein and calories. And good is just hitting calories. So it gives people, instead of that automatic, I've blown the day, let's just, go just to the pizza parlor. It gives them options like, well, I didn't hit my macros for the day, but that's all right. I can still hit my protein target and then hit my calories. Or, man, we went out to eat. I looked at MyFitnessPal afterwards. I know I should have planned beforehand, but I didn't, so something to learn there. But wow, I went way over my fat and carbohydrate targets, and I'm way under on protein. I only have 200 calories left for the day. So I guess all I'm going to have is a scoop of whey, and I'll be off on all my macros, but at least I didn't go over my energy intake. So it's paying respect to the order of the pyramid and giving someone options instead of just being like, well, I blew it, so screw it.
I love that.
So
best, better, good. That's an awesome thing for people to implement. And then just to clarify a tad about being more inclusive. So would that be for folks focusing more on, hey, get these things in. So get 5 servings of veggies in versus cut out these refined foods. Stop eating all junk.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, if you legitimately get someone to add 5 servings of vegetables and 5 servings of fruit per day and get their fluid intake in, it's rare that they're going to be, like not so full that they can't work in, that they're going to be working in a bunch of junk food. That normally has overwhelmingly positive effects on people and helping them set up systems to do so. So exactly right. You're focusing more on including foods that are going to improve your health and ensure that you have an adequate amount of micronutrients and fiber versus excluding foods that supposedly are unhealthy, which in most of the time they're just devoid of nutrients. They're not acutely harmful.
Right. That's awesome, man. So I think it'd be really helpful for folks, having all the knowledge that you have. You touched on this a little bit, but what does sort of a typical day look like for you, breakfast, lunch, and dinner? You touched on having a protein bar for breakfast, and then I'm assuming that you can kind of get straight to work, and that works with your lifestyle. But what does sort of a normal day look like for Eric?
Great question. Yeah, so I normally wake up and I have a Quest bar, and just because I like them. And in addition to that, I have a big glass of water, a piece of fruit, and that is and like some fish oil and my multivitamin. That's about it, and that's pretty much it. And then at lunch, I have a reasonably sized meal with a serving of protein, and I've got a vegetable and a piece of fruit in there. And then within 1 to 2.5 hours later, I'm in the gym. And then when I finish, I have about 40 grams of protein from whey, because I typically train full body. I weigh 100 kilograms, so 220 pounds. And then about 2 to 3 hours after that, I have a big dinner. So I have roughly 4 protein servings a day. And dinner is typically cooked at home with me and my wife. And it's got a huge vegetable component. So it knocks out, like, I mean, we have massive veggie servings at dinner, so it's probably getting me 3 to 5 servings of vegetables in one shot there. Also a large heaping of protein, and then a fair amount of fats as well. So I tend to kind of, my calorie size increases throughout the day. So kind of the opposite of the 90s kind of rules of eat big breakfast, small lunch, and a tiny little dinner, and then don't eat after 6 p.m. And I just find that works really well with my lifestyle. And I tick all my boxes of ensuring an adequate intake of all the macronutrients, minimum intake of protein of at least 0.8 grams per pound roughly. Splitting it up between 4 servings, getting protein on either side of my training, and getting adequate fruit and vegetables as well. And then some of the stuff that I have to really pay attention to is making sure I get enough water every day and kind of keeping a running track of protein in my head. One thing I typically do is I'll have another Quest bar at some point throughout the day, just because it'll help me get my protein up to that minimum threshold. Also there's a company here in New Zealand where I live called My Food Bag, where they send you 4 recipes per week and send you the groceries to make the food for that. Obviously, it's something that, if you have a well-established career and you're busy, it's very helpful, but it's a little more expensive than doing it on your own. So it's kind of a thing that, you could just be like, oh, you're just being lazy. It's like, well, also it ensures that I do it too. So it's something that I'm fortunate enough to be able to do, and they have heavily high vegetable intakes in that, and they also deliver a bunch of fruit. So we've got fruit all over the damn house that we are constantly like, oh shit, we've got to eat our 3 pieces of fruit today that we do. So my snacks are typically a piece of fruit or a Quest bar, which helps me get both of those targets in, and that's kind of how I've automated that behavior. Because if you were to leave me to my own devices completely, my protein would be a little too low, and my fruit and vegetable intake would be too low, but everything else would be okay. Which is, those are important pieces. So, and my fluid intake would be too low. So basically I carry around, a thing of water, and I'm constantly reminded by keeping fruit out. So the same tools that someone would use to hide food they don't want to eat, we just keep fruit out on the counter so we can, so it's always a reminder. They're like, oh shit, I didn't have my fruit.
That's awesome. So you're basically taking remembering out of the equation. You put it in front of your face, just like you wouldn't want to put, notice, guys, that Eric didn't say he's eating a piece of fruit and a high protein, high fiber snack, as opposed to, maybe crackers and cheese that can just drive up calorie content, lots of, dips and chips and things like that. So super solid snacks that he keeps in plain sight along with the water to make it easy on him, not having to remember, and then keeping sort of the treaty stuff out of sight and then choosing to eat that when he wants to. So that's awesome. You set yourself up for success. That's cool.
Unless I want to gain weight, and then I increase my frequency and then I start eating out more, and we get chips and shit like that, just because it's really an easy way to help drive up my calories, and I still keep the backbone of everything else. But I try to be not just satisfied after a meal, but full, and a lot of Italian and Mexican nights out, and that helps a lot.
That's awesome. Yeah. So the same principles can work either for you or against you or whatever.
Exactly
if you're
right.
Trying to change your goals, right? So this next question is just for purely selfish purposes. How do you stay so productive? How are you getting so much done? I think you have more letters after your name than I have in my name. So it's like, how are you getting all this stuff done, man?
Well, I think the underlying foundation of it all is that I really love this stuff, so much like, I think it's really unfair when a bodybuilder or a powerlifter or someone who's been like an athlete and who loves their sport sits there and critiques someone who struggles to get to the gym because they don't really like it. It's like, well, dude, when I go lift weights, I'm getting more enjoyment out of that than playing video games. So, is it really that hard for me to go to the gym 5 times a week when it's recreation and fun and just happens to be beneficial for me? No. I love everything about it, and it happens to be probably a more beneficial and socially acceptable, thing to spend that much time on compared to video games, for example. Although these days, if you're really good, you can get paid, so that's not too bad.
Yeah, but, true. It's insane how much those guys make, actually.
That's true. Very true. Unfortunately, not like most sports, not everyone can be that good.
Right.
But anyway, so I think it's you have to find something you're passionate about, no matter what it is, and that makes everything easy. It's easy to put more effort into it. It's easy to be disciplined, and then it self-rewards, and you keep doing it more. So I think that's the biggest kind of underlying factor with all of it. The rest of it is, I definitely would say I'm obsessive about everything I do. And addicted and obsessed are not the same word. You know, you can have an obsession that if you moderate it, it's a net positive, you know, or it can be a net negative, depending on how you let it affect your relationships and things like that. So I think kind of the dark side of it is that I definitely have to learn how to set boundaries in place so that my marriage doesn't suffer, so that I maintain good friendships with people, so that I keep a bit more balance in my life that then in turn helps everything and helps my life in general. Because you can only do that for so long before you start causing problems for yourself in your personal life. With those caveats put in place, that there's a huge foundation of passion and that I have been probably so extreme as it's caused problems previously, then it comes down to time and energy management. So when I wake up, I always have kind of my 8 a.m. slot set as my podcast or interview or talk to my students or set up a intermittent Skype with some of my week-to-week clients as a slot there. So at 8 a.m. most times you can find me with my blue snowball on my computer talking to somebody about cool stuff like we are right now. And then from there, I basically work until lunch on business-related stuff, whether that is mass, the pyramids, a 3DMJ article, editing, meeting with folks from Gravitas or FitGenie, all the different little pies I have my hand in. That's my time for that. And then after lunch, then it's typically a little more academic focused, which has changed a lot now that I have my PhD, but I think that's just kind of useful information for anyone who is in academics, that I had it actually partitioned out. And then so that's the time management side of it, is I actually have a schedule. And then somewhere in the early evening, I train. And then once I get back from training, I'm done. It's dinner time, hang out with my wife, spend some quality time. And then I match my schedule, which I can control, to her schedule as far as when she's in class or when she's at work or whatever's going on in her life at that time, so that I can get as much done as I can without interacting with our relationship. And then the times when I do need to step outside of that, it's a rarity, and she's very willing to accommodate, because I'm not constantly working when she's when it's normally our time. It's like, hey, something crazy came up, I've got to go to this meeting. Is that cool? Oh, of course, no big deal, you know. So that's built into it. And then the energy management part of it is I think something that not a lot of people talk about, because everyone talks about time management. And I'll give you an example here, because I think it illustrates it best. When you do a lit review for a thesis-based degree, you might spend weeks just simply reading the titles of studies and then going, will this fit my inclusion criteria? No, delete from my reference managing citation software. Or reading then the abstract, or then going through the full text, doing Control F, resistance training. Okay, there's no resistance training in the study. It's not going to be in my thesis. Delete. That is completely mindless work, but it takes up a ton of time. Like I said, if you're trying to whittle down 5,000 articles to only the ones that are relevant to your lit review, you might get down from 5,000 to 100, like I did in my lit review. So that means I had to cut 4,900 articles and read their titles or their abstracts, or go through their full text and kind of make sure they weren't relevant. That did take me months. But the amount of creative energy it took me to do that was nothing. If anything, it's like mind-numbingly boring. So what I would do is I would sit down and go, right, I think I'm going to try something creative right now. I'm going to do some writing, or maybe think about making a video, or maybe create something for my PhD, work on a chapter, work on a publication, whatever you can think of. I do a lot of things that require creative energy. And if that totally fizzles out and I've got writer's block or talker's block or whatever, and I just can't do it, I just stop trying. And then I just hammer away at something that is mindless, and put something that, spend my time effectively still doing what I can do, instead of banging my head against the wall. And, when I hear someone say, yeah, I spent 4 hours and I only wrote one paragraph, I would have been like, man, you should have not been trying to write that day. Unless the deadline's tomorrow, you should have been doing something else, go meditate and do the dishes, and then, frickin', clean the bathroom, or like, do things that are going to take up your time other times. But if you're not creative, you're not going to be able to force it. It makes it worse. So I think periodizing your energy management and kind of auto-regulating it, I think, is super important, and that has been very useful for me.
Yeah, I love that, as far as not forcing it and just kind of realizing, hey, today might not be the day where I get a lot of writing done, and work with it as opposed to against it. So that's awesome, man. Thank you for that. I want to be respectful of your time, but I'd love to know sort of what's exciting you at the moment. What's next? What's getting you up in the morning? Like, what are you pumped about as far as research goes, or whatever?
Great question, and not an easy one to answer because I'm quite pumped about a few things. So a lot of cool stuff is on the horizon. We started, by we, I mean myself, Dr. Mike Zardos, and Greg Nuckols, started monthly applications in strength sport. That is a monthly research review where we cover research articles specifically relevant to physique and strength sport, and we put that out once a month. We're now into the final issue for the year, which is super cool, and we're going to have a Cyber Monday, Black Friday sale, and a big chunk of that's going to go to charity, which we're really excited about. So we'll be announcing that soon, and that's something I get excited about every month. We're also working on the second edition of the Muscle and Strength Pyramids, the kind of what we've been talking about, and that'll probably come out sometime in late next year. So that's cool. But in the meantime, we're also going to have another sale for the books, just so if anyone is thinking about getting them, and if this interview comes out before or after that. If it's after, too bad. If it comes out before, then just wait until the sale so you can get them cheap.
This should be out pretty soon here in the next week or two. Yeah.
Cool. So then, just hopefully the sale will be going on when you hear this. And then, as far as research, I've got a role with AUT now, not as a student, but actually as a research fellow. And we're working on a few projects related to both nutrition and training, which I'm pretty excited about. So those are the big ones. And then lastly, my colleague Lyle McDonald, who I've been playing a supportive role on his book on nutrition and training for females. He is going to have that out pretty soon. I think by the end of the year, early next year, that'll be out. So that's pretty cool. And just doing the final editing touches on that, I contributed a fair bit on how it all applies to the female competitors' strength and physique.
Oh, dude, that's awesome. I actually reached out to Lyle this morning. I am really hoping to get him on the podcast to talk about that. So I didn't realize that you had a big part in that. That's amazing.
Yeah, he reached out to me. I was very flattered by it, as far as just making sure that his recommendations met kind of the real world applications for strength and physique athletes, and we really hit it off and work well together. And so we've been going back and forth since we started writing those books.
Very cool. So I'm going to provide links in the show notes to the Muscle and Strength Nutrition Pyramid ebook, the Muscle and Strength Training Pyramid ebook, which maybe we can talk about sometime in the future, have you back on if you're open to that. And then Definitely. Also to the Mass Research Review with Greg Nuckols and Mike Zardos. And then lastly, Eric, where can people follow you on the socials?
Right. So Helms 3DMJ is my Instagram handle. That's probably where I'm the most active. I am active on Facebook, but the algorithms there seem to make it so I might have 20,000 followers, but I get 4 likes on a post, and I haven't figured that out yet. So
I haven't either.
Yeah. So my response to that has been well, screw you, Zuckerberg. I'm just going to be on Instagram. And then, forgetting that he owns that as well. And then, right. So nonetheless, I'm much more active on Instagram. We have a regular podcast at 3DMJ if you want to hear us coaches talk shop about bodybuilding and powerlifting. So you can find us on iTunes there. That's the 3DMJ podcast. On Facebook, I'm Eric R. Helms. If you Google me and find my face, you can find that. Instagram, it's Helms 3DMJ. And then just go to 3dmusclejourney.com and you can find the links to our podcast. We have a regular blog posts there. We have a thing we call the 3DMJ Vault, which has a bunch of free and paid products for people who want to learn more about their sport or their hobby. And that's pretty much it.
That's awesome, man. I'll link to all that stuff in the show notes. And then for the super keen folks too, do you have a ResearchGate profile as well?
I do have a ResearchGate profile. If you really want to nerd out, you can find all of my peer-reviewed research there for sure.
Very
that's,
cool.
You can link that too.
Okay, so. Awesome, man. Well, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. Really appreciate you taking the time, and looking forward to our next chat.
All right, man. I look forward to it too.